Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to the EFF Book Club discussion session. We will be going on from now at the top of the hour, 1200 hours. We hope that we will spend an hour giving you a summary at first of the reading that we've been involved with, and then entertaining some of the questions that you have sent through. But just as a way of beginning or a point of departure, we want to communicate our condolences to the 5 people that have died due to coronavirus in South Africa. That is the death toll as of last night, communicated by the South African authorities, and wish strength to their families, wish comfort to their families, and may their souls indeed rest in peace and perfect peace at that. And also express our solidarity to all victims of coronavirus, 1,300 plus people in South Africa alone, and over 700,000 across the world. We really wish you a speedy recovery. And to the rest of us, particularly South Africans, let us stay at home. Let us continue to practice the necessary hygiene precautions that have been communicated. Wash your hands as constantly as possible, every time after eating, every time after going to the restroom. Let's practice the hygiene precautions that have been communicated. And finally, we wish you all strength across the country this lockdown. So basically, I will be focusing on Karl Marx. So the presentation is going to be very straightforward. And I'm going to try to be as accessible as possible. That means not use a lot of jargon. So firstly, we will deal with who Karl Marx is, and then what is Marxism, and then what is capitalism, what is materialism, and then what is the law of value, or what is called the labor theory of value. Karl Marx called it the law of value. And then we'll deal at the end with what is socialism. And then we'll deal with questions that have been sent through from across South Africa by fighters and ordinary peoples of the country in relation to the reading. I must emphasize that the questions that we ultimately selected are the ones that are relevant to the reading. So you see, on the basis of the questions that people ask, whether they've actually engaged with reading. This is a book club, so you have to read. We all have to read. We cannot conduct a struggle without reading. We're not the first ones to conduct a struggle, and in order to learn from other people in history, in other parts of the world, one of the greatest and most easiest way to do that is reading. So in the process, we have to inculcate a culture of reading. So Karl Marx was born on the 5th of May in 1818 in what is now Germany. He was ethically a Jew, so a German Jew. In fact, it is that majority of his friends used to call him Mo because he was like a darker looking Jew. And he was born in a family of, he was the third of 9 children. So a relatively well-off family. His father was a lawyer with an upper income, in that time managed to buy a big house, managed to take Karl Marx to university. And Karl Marx showed great potential at a very early age. So he was, taken to university. The first university he studied in is the University of Bonn, and there he studied law. He was mostly wanting to do philosophy, but his father, forced him or pushed or persuaded him to do law, and ultimately graduated with a PhD from the University of Jena. As a student, he was very active in many things. Mostly, he was a young Hegelian, which was an important intellectual organization that was studying the ideas of the philosopher or the German philosopher Hegel. He got married to Jenny von Welsfalen, and they had 7 children. but due to poverty and other things, only survived to become adults. Marx worked most of the time as an editor of different publications. He moved from Germany, he went to Paris, he moved from Paris and ended in London. And he was really as well central as an activist. He was politically active, and it was central in the formation and the activities of the Communist Party, or the Communist League, in fact. And secondly, in the First International, which was an international workmen's association, bringing organizations left across North America and Europe, mainly to come and unite and fight against capitalist exploitation. And he authored two important texts. I think here in these two important texts lie centrally the biggest influence in the intellectual movement thereof. One is the Communist Manifesto, which they co-authored with his comrade and friend called Frederick Engels. The Communist Manifesto was a document for the Communist League, and it communicates very passionately the ideas of socialism, a critique of capitalist industrial society. It's a brilliant read. When you have time, you must read it. The second one is a much more voluminous work, big, I think more than 600 pages. It's called Das Kapital. It had 3 volumes, and they're all like big. So the first one, volume 1, is much more powerful. If you can get through it, you'll basically come to terms with what are the central ideas of Karl Marx. That is who we are talking about. Now, what is Marxism? Marxism is a political and intellectual movement inspired by the ideas of Karl Marx. It is first and foremost a political movement and an intellectual movement inspired by the ideas of Karl Marx. We find it's like Jesus Christ. So Christians or Christianity, it is a spiritual movement that finds its origins in the ideas, the preachings of Jesus Christ, hence they are called Christians or Christianity. So we have Marxism, which is a movement that is inspired by the ideas of Karl Marx, and we call ourselves Marxists because we practice these ideas and we bring them into being, like Christians bring the word of God to being. So basically that's what, in the first instance, that's what Marxism means. What are these ideas? At the center is actually a science of society, of analyzing society, of predicting the developments or human development in general, of diagnosing social relations. So it's a science as well. Marxism is a science that has to do with understanding society. So these ideas of Marx include, socialism, communism, labor theory of value, materialism, class struggle. All these ideas constitute a package. So in the EFF, when we say we go to Marx to understand capitalism, to draw the tools in order for us to analyze and critique a society, and which is in constant motion, of course, called capitalism, which is a society that we live in. But also, Marxists are in pursuit of a political objective, which is socialism. So they critique capitalism and find it to be an inadequate, exploitative, unjust system, and they wish to replace it with socialism. And we will get into that in a moment. So you can say that you're a Marxist, do not believe in the pursuit of socialism, the eradication of all classes. So in a way, that is what Marxism means. Now let's go to the very first thing that is important. So Karl Marx was born in a time, at the height of, the Industrial Revolution, what now we'll call the first Industrial Revolution. He was born in the times, when the steam engines were being invented, when the light bulbs were being invented. but most importantly, through when machines became the center of production, particularly in the textile industry. Ordinary big factories at the time were textile workers. Also, cotton, the people who were producing shoes, the people who were producing shirts and curtains and all those things. So, but he was in the industrial age, the height of it, and lived through its most important era. And that's why he thought it's important to understand this society, its inner workings, and how we live in it, and how we can, out of it, create much more better conditions. So the central concept, or the central thing from which Karl Marx goes, into the back to understand human history, is this society that he lives in, which is a capitalist society. And in as much as he has been gone for over 200 years, I think, or so, the reality is we too still live in a capitalist society. So in Communist Manifesto, one of the most beautiful lines they sort of introduced to characterize capitalism is that capitalism turns all that is solid into, it makes all that is solid into air. And this is important because if you are going to understand capitalism, it has to do with, big industry, it has to do with constant innovation, constant reinvention of the production tools. But at the core, it is a society that, in general, where production is for profit's sake, where we produce in order to maximize profit. That becomes the general mode of doing production. That's what a capitalist society is that everything is driven in, as far as production is concerned, to the maximization of profit, not in order to achieve anything else, but for profit's sake. People just want to have profit and keep maximizing profit. To do what? To maximize more profit, in order so that what can happen? So that there can be more profit. So everything is driven by this logic of maximization of profit in relation to production. So why do people produce? People produce in order to live. Production means, the other way is the means of existence, the things we need in order to sustain ourselves. These things and the way in which they are produced and the things that are used to produce them, under capitalism, profit is the drive. They are driven all to the logic of the maximization of profit, where profit is an end in itself. And in a capitalist society, there are, two classes in the main. You will see this as well in the Communist Manifesto, that unlike any other historical societies, what capitalism is really significant about is that it produces largely two antagonistic classes, two main classes. The capitalists, which are the people who own the means of production, and the people who don't own the means of production, called the proletariat or the working class. So the working class are people who don't own the means of production. So in order for them to live, in order for them to survive, they depend on working for those who own the means of production. If they don't work, they struggle to survive. If they don't find a job, they struggle to survive. So as a result, finding a job is a means of social inclusion. Otherwise, you are socially excluded. You can't do many things, because everything, in order to access it, you depend, as it were, on buying it. And the means to buy it, you have to go and work. And in order to work, you must sell your labor. So those are the two antagonistic classes. The people who own the means of production and the workers, the working class. So in the working class, there are people who work, who wake up in the morning, 8 o'clock, come back in the afternoon at 6 o'clock. Those people have jobs. And then there are people who are unemployed. So all of those people, both categories, they belong to a class of people who don't own the means of production. So in order to survive, they depend on a job, on selling their labor. We'll come back to the sort of technical explanation of all these things. So capitalism is characterized by this mental economic inequality, material inequality. And we'll come to really why Karl Marx finds this an important, an important foundation for understanding capitalist society. And then the The other important thing is that this capitalist society, it's got the working class, it's got inequality, but one of the most important things is this thing of all that is sold that's into air. Constantly, the people who build the pyramids, and this is a perfect example of understanding capitalist society and civilization. So let's compare it to the Egyptian civilization. The people who build pyramid, they build a pyramid and they like it. It's archaic, it's beautiful, it represents the beauty of a specific, moment in their development. They don't tamper with it. It's great. There it is, at the Colosseum. But under a capitalist society, buildings of capital don't last forever. They constantly change. You go off cent in a month, the building left, a month ago, you may come back and there are changes into it. That's a simple example of capitalist, obsession with the constant revolution and development, as it were, of tools, of things, in order that they can maximize profit, in order that they can constantly sell. I mean, the production of a car, for an example, you have a situation where, the producers of a car, they withhold certain, developments because they feel like, in order for us to maximize profit, we'll put these developments in the next model. So you have to constantly revolutionize, or constantly transform, constantly develop, constantly improve your product. So that's important about capitalism. And there are consequences into this, which we'll talk about at a later stage. But basically, what is capitalism? It's a society that is based on the production of profit for its sake, in which there are people who own the means of production and the people who don't. And these people who don't own the means of production, in order to survive, they depend on selling their labor, they depend on a job, they depend on a wages they get from a job in order to survive. What are the means of production? The means of production are the tools we use, land, the machinery that we use in order to produce things, to produce coffee, to produce a t-shirt, to produce food. Those are the means of production. The things we use to produce products we intend to consume. We'll come back to this. So the other important aspect is what is materialism. And here I think that, at the foundation level, in order to understand Marxism, you have to grapple with the concept of materialism. So materialism is, the sort of philosophy and science, or the theory of understanding society, of understanding phenomena. Just a quick background. When Marx was writing, when Marx was, growing up in the university and developing as a thinker, the dominant ideology, the dominant and the most celebrated ideas were the ideas of, German idealists. So Kant and Hegel. So these people, the way they were, sort of understanding history and understanding humanity. So basically, if you ask the question, what it is to be a human being, there is an idealist answer to that. To be a human being is consciousness. To be a human being is reason. To be a human being is to possess reason, is to possess subjectivity, is to possess thinking. And in the process of understanding a human being and how he therefore develops, all you do is to trace thinking, is to trace the ideas of a human being. So the subject of idealism is ideas, the ideal. But this produces people who think they are individuals who can exist on their own, who don't need other people. It makes you always analyze life from a point of view of the ego, from a point of view. So if a person who is an idealist were to write the history of South Africa, they're going to emphasize on ideas of people. They're going to emphasize great men history. They're going to say Nelson Mandela formed the MK, Nelson Mandela did this. But that will be a distortion. So idealists, in a sense, talk about life or analyze society or analyze relations using, individualism, as it were, the ego, the ideas, thought, reason, as it were. So Karl Marx then comes to, a different conclusion, a different system of understanding society, a different science of reading the developments in society, of reading social relations, and of understanding what it is to be human. And this system is called dialectics. So because the last person that he was engaging with, which is Hegel, also spoke about dialectics, how Marx distinguishes himself from dialectics is that for him, it's not thought, it is not idealism, but it is the material. So people have great ideas, people have great strength, people have great courage. They are able to do a whole host of creative things, but they do these creative things under conditions, under material conditions and circumstances that half the time they don't choose. So the ideas is a contingency of material conditions on the ground. It is you can think ideas, but you do not think them under the circumstances of your choice. It's like you really need circumstances to really come up with some of the ideas that we find about in life. So, but at the same time, humanity, and this is central to this understanding of dialectics, you don't always isolate the individual from social relations. In order to understand the individual, you have to understand the social relations that they exist in. You can't understand a thing without the whole. Because in the whole is the thing, and in the thing is the whole. In a way, that is basically the most important, sort of disjuncture that takes Marx into what is then this materialism, is that in order for us to understand individuals, in order for us to understand historical development, people's history, we have to base it on the material conditions. So in the system of dialectics is different aspects. The first important aspect of dialectics, as I said, is precisely that everything is connected, but everything is in constant motion. Things are not static, things are in constant motion. They're all connected. I mean, it's like the standard Hegelian idea. What it is to be human, you cannot be human without the other. You do not think, therefore you are. In fact, what you are, you always rely on the recognition of others. You could be crazy if you think, maybe I'm dreaming, maybe I'm inside a machine. You can't rely only on your thoughts. You have to depend on other people to check that indeed you are not going crazy, indeed you are not dreaming, indeed you are not inside a machine and a machine is thinking through you. So that already means in order to be human, I am human because of other human beings. So which means social relations are important to who we think we are, how we think what we are, and the things we do in society. This is very important. But also an important aspect of dialectics is the fact that, as I said, everything can't be analyzed, can't be understood in isolation. Everything is always connected. But reduction of quantity into quality. This is important. A dialectic method always tries to sort of track the change from quantity into quality. And the best example here is like if I take water, put it in a pot and boil it. In the beginning, I've got water, I've got a pot, and I've got a temperature. As I increase the temperature at different levels, that's quantities. There are many things happening. The water is still the same, but only at the point of boil do I start getting gas. So what is the origin of gas, which is quality? The origin of gas is a multiplicity of things. And at the center of these, quantities is constant contradictions. The contradiction that is created by the temperature and water. As it increases, the water boil and you produce, as it were, gas. So that is an important principle principle of dialectics is that one, in the movement of quantity into quality, inherent in that movement is contradictions. So there is a contradiction to the movement of everything. What makes motion in anything is a contradiction, a positive and a negative. It's not just the negative, or it's not just the positive. So in life, you can't understand life mainly focusing on the negative. You also have to focus on the positive. They are mutually connected. They are not exclusive. You find the other in the other. There's no understanding the other without the other. So this is an important aspect of dialectics as a method. So dialectical materialism, therefore, means the application of this principle with materiality, with material conditions as the focus, as the logos, as the center. And then you've got the second or last concept under materialism, which is historical materialism. So under historical materialism, what we do under historical materialism is apply dialectical materialism to the study of human history, to the study of human development. And the focus at all times is what are the circumstances, what are the conditions, what are the material conditions that make people to who they are, that produce the revolution, that produce this and that invention, that made people move from this area to the other. It is always the material conditions. The material conditions, it is in those material conditions, it is because of those material conditions that people become creative, that change occurs. Sometimes this change, it's minimal, particularly, if in a whole you are studying that each and every aspect of society, there are always contradictions happening, but these contradictions can be minimal. But when brought together, they can produce a much bigger contradiction, which can either result into war or result into a revolution. So that is what materialism, in short, means. I'm trying very hard here not to be too, technical, but that's basically what materialism is. Summary: dialectical materialism is the philosophical system of understanding phenomena, and in which one, we do not analyze. We always know that a thing is always part of a whole. You can't isolate phenomena from the rest of a whole in order for you to make sense of it. People or human beings must always be placed in relations, in relation to the things they do, in relations to the things that sustain them, in relation to other people. If you're going to make sense of human beings, you have to understand social relations. You can go mad if we can throw you now wherever, even if people are not thoughts. Thoughts are produced, as it were, by social relations and the relationships we form with everything around us. And so that is dialectical materialism. And the study of history, therefore, is the application of this method in understanding how human beings and humanity develop. So, and Karl Marx does this in understanding how capitalism develops from feudalism. And he doesn't study thoughts. He doesn't study the creative ideas, say they came up with this, they came up with that, they were so courageous. He doesn't tell it like that. He goes into the circumstances, the conditions, and the materiality that made it possible for development, for movement, and the ultimate rupture of change that became a capitalist society. I hope that you are bearing with me. I hope the network is still okay on the side. It's okay this side. So we're going to now move into a much more, technical concept. Just to recap, we started with who Karl Marx is, a philosopher who lived in the 1800s and wrote largely about socialism and about capitalism, and was central in the establishment of the International Working Men's Association, which means was a political activist, but also was central in the Communist League that was in London. Authored many books, but at the center is Das Kapital as well as the Communist Manifesto. We then moved to make sense of, if this is Karl Marx, what is to be a Marxist? To be a Marxist is to be a follower of Karl Marx and a follower of ideas. But we discussed described Marxism as a political movement in pursuit of socialism, and in which we find the tools to critique capitalism, to critique society, to critique social relations, and we use these tools to engage in a struggle in order to break out of capitalism and establish a socialist society. Socialist society is a society in which the working class who are fighting, who are in constant exploitation by the capitalist class, finally overcome the exploitation and produce and begin to become direct producers, where whatever they produce for themselves, and they don't produce it and give it to the boss, and the boss gives them a wage. So we spoke about capitalism being a system where production is for profit's sake, where everything that is produced in society, generalized form of production, is for profit and for its maximization. Why do people wake up? If all of us, if you want to survive, you have to go participate in this system of producing for profit's sake. Otherwise, you're going to die. You want to have food, you want to have many things, you'll beg on the street, but you'll be begging people who are working or people who are in the system of producing for profit's sake, where profit is an end in itself. There's no surviving. There's no getting out of it. Even if you say, me, I'm a pastor, I'm a man of God, you to eat, you're going to depend on the system in which everything is driven, that is produced for the maximization of profit. And this is a problem, as we already indicated, that it creates people who basically don't own the means of production. And as a result of not owning the means of production, they rely on those who own the means of production in order to survive. And these people, in order to maximize profit, they have to exploit the workers. They don't pay them the real wages. In the wage, they're able to isolate a profit for themselves. So they pay workers just so that workers can come back tomorrow and work. But we're going to become more technical under the discussion of the law of value. This is the central idea in Marxism. And the reason why we do a video is because you can always rewind, listen again, as it were. So if you can't keep up, these are very complex ideas. They're difficult ideas. Karl Marx himself took 10 years to write Das Kapital. So it's not easy. We don't expect you to grasp it one and the same time. You have to go and repeat yourself over and over again in order for you to fully grasp these ideas. But let's go to the law of value, otherwise known as the labor theory of value. But the law of value, so the law of value, Karl Marx is trying to understand the origins of capitalist society and inner workings. Okay, so if you can understand the law of value, you might understand, you are halfway through understanding how capitalism works in our everyday. And I'll come to how these things are sort of mystified, they are hidden, they operate through some magical realism, some magical, distortions in order for us not to see them. And it's really in the labor theory of value, or in the law of value, you truly understand how capitalism hides its true form from all of us. So value, but also the law of value, Karl Marx is really trying to understand social relations, because to produce value, for you to say something is valuable, if you are carrying a diamond, or if you are carrying a gun, or if you have a car is useless unless you have to drive it to go somewhere else. So that somewhere else already reveals social relations. So the idea of understanding value is the idea of understanding social relations. So one is this concept called commodity or a product. So for Karl Marx, commodities are things we produce in order to sell in the market. Other things that we produce for Karl Marx are not commodities. A thing becomes a commodity at a point at which it is sold in the market. But inside the commodity are three kinds of values. One is use value. And for Karl Marx, use value is the usefulness of the product for society. Unless it's not useful for society, he doesn't think that it's use value. So the pen, the important use of the pen is that we write to it. That is its use value. Okay? It's very simple. That is the entity number one, the feature number one that is inside a commodity. The second value that is inside a commodity is its exchange value. So its exchange value is basically the ratio at which a product is exchangeable for other products. So for instance, we say 1 pen is equals to 5 pages, or 1 loaf of bread is equal, or one bottle, 1 liter of Coca-Cola is equals to loaf of bread, something like that. Or so that is what exchange value means. Means once the commodity has a use value, once we determine its use value, then we say the second type of value in it is how much can it be exchanged for other commodities. And this is expressed in interesting mathematical formulas. I won't get into them. That is an exchange value, the ratio with which a good or a service is exchangeable for other goods and services. And then the last type of value is market value. And this is the ratio, this ratio, which means exchange value, now expressed in money form. Expressed in money form. So it will be much difficult to always go to the market and say, I have a pen. What can I buy with this? What can I exchange this pen with? Or you say, I have a pen, I want oranges. But okay, this pen is equals to 3 oranges. It will be much more difficult to keep the inventory like that one. This good is multipliable or is exchangeable at this ratio with other goods. It will be much more difficult. So the exchange value of all goods can be expressed in money. That's what market value means, is that it's this ratio expressed in monetary terms. But after the alterations in demand and supply. So this is important. The market value of a commodity is the ratio expressed in money after alterations in demand and supply. Of course, there are alterations that make something have a price. One of them is marketing, but between between an exchange value and its price, what we are basically describing there is this ratio of a good expressed in money terms after the alterations of demand and supply. What is demand and supply? If I'm a supplier of oranges, I've got 3 oranges. I'm a supplier. I've got 3 oranges. I put them in the market. My 3 oranges are there. If there's only one demand of an orange, it will make the price of these oranges to be cheaper. But if I've got 3 oranges and there are 5 people looking for them, it may make the price of each orange higher in order for it to ultimately be in the hands of 3 people. Okay? That's, basically what a commodity, as it were, means. Now, so the mystery here is, so where does profit come from? Where does profit come from in the whole of the price of a commodity? If this price is 3 rand, what in this 3 rand, how do they extract profit? How do they make what is called a surplus? And Karl Marx's answer to that is wage. Is that in order for us to understand the origins of profit, the origins of profit is wages. And this is because I'll just basically do the maths for those interested in the maths. So for instance, the theory goes, or the theorem or the formula goes, if 5 multiply by 5 multiplied by 5 is, okay, let's say 2 multiplied by 5 is equals to 2 multiplied by 5. If 2 multiplied by 5 is 10. And also 2 divided by 20 is 10. The common denominator here is 10. We only know that 2 multiplied by 5 is equals to 2 divided by 10 because they both result into 10. So he says, if all commodities in the market, if this pen is exchangeable for 3 stock sweets, and these 3 stock sweets are exchangeable for 1 orange, and 1 orange is exchangeable for 2 apples, what is the common denominator there? Because that particular movement of things, it's already at a later stage. It's at the stage of selling. What is common? What is it that is the common denominator of all that is produced? He says it is labor. It is the thing that produces these things. Okay? So I'll come back to this in a moment. So and labor for Karl Marx, on one hand, it's not all labor. If I'm washing dishes here at home, yes, I'm doing labor. But the most important labor for Karl Marx is the socially necessary labor. It is the labor that I have to sell out there. The labor that is, exchangeable, that people need, as it were. That I go and get something in return for it. That is the labor that we are talking about, okay? So workers sell labor power. Remember when we were talking about capitalism, we said the 2 classes. There are people who own the means of production, the means of subsistence. They own all of them. And then as a result, they create people who don't have access to these means of production. As a result, people have to sell. So inside the commodity is contribution, number 1, of labor. Of course, there's land, there's rent, and everything else. But there's a contribution of human beings called laborers who have sold their labor power. And for Karl Marx, labor power is itself a commodity because it can be sold in exchange for wages. Okay? Now, how do we get to profit? Surely profit is not, determined there at the point of equilibrium between demand and supply. If that is the case, why are products not sold at their exchange, at their production value, So after the worker produces the thing, after we have put all the necessary, the machine, we've paid the rent and everything else, then the product must be sold at that price. And it makes sense. But the product is not sold at that price. It's not sold at that price in order for the person who sells it to make profit. So how do we calculate? Where do we get this profit? So Karl Marx says it's because when a worker works, he works, the calculation of their labor power is on the clock. If I work for 8 hours a day and I'm producing pens, I can produce, let's say, 100 pens in 8 hours. Okay? So I produce, or let's take a single pen. I produce 1 pen in 8 hours. All right? Or I produce, take 1 pen, I produce 1 pen in 8 hours. After producing that pen, it took me 8 hours to produce that pen. The capitalist takes it and he says, okay, I pay Mwiseni 2 rand to produce this pen. He gives me my 2 rand. Then he says, in order for me to have produced this pen, I had to have a factory, I had to have the raw materials. And these raw materials cost me 3 rand. He goes and pays these raw materials. 3 rand, 3 rand, 3 rand, 3 rand. And then he's left with a pen. So he's the 2 rand, he adds the price of a pen. He takes 3 rand of the raw materials, he adds to the price of a pen. If he sells 2 rand plus 3 rand at 5 rand into the market, then he's breaking even. There's no surplus. In order for him to make surplus, he has to add. But where does he take this time? Where does he take this time? Because if he's going to add another price on top, where does it come from? So he forces the laborer to take a pen that he produces at 8 hours, not at 2 rand, but at 2 bob or 20 cents. Okay? Then gives the worker 20 cents, pays the raw materials, and then that is how he's able to then sell the product at its exchange price, and he makes profit by robbing who? The worker. Of course, many people may say, if you're thinking about it on the basis of the individual worker, you may not fully appreciate. So Karl Marx says it's not really depending on one single individual. Remember, dialectical materialism is that we always have to locate the individual in social relations. So truly, the labor that you are as an individual contributing is depending on all our labor that people who are producing the same product or the product that came into that production cycle are concerned. So, and it calls this labor, the sort of aggregate labor. So if the socially necessary time to produce pen is 8 hours and you produce it in 3 hours, it will still sell at an 8-hour sort of price. So it doesn't mean if I maximize and say I'll work for 14 hours or I'll work for 8 hours, there is a socially acceptable labor time that it takes to produce a product. So in this mathematical formula, we have to factor this in. But the golden thing that we have to take out of this is that the only thing that capitalists can manipulate, which is a factor of production in the production of a commodity, the only thing that he can fluctuate, the only thing that he can negotiate with is the wage. What is the wage? The wage is the price of the worker. And because the worker is a commodity, because the worker is selling, this price doesn't always stay the same. But basically, it's enough money to keep you alive. Enough money sometimes to, you calculate it. You can see how in the unions they negotiate. We need money for transport. We need money in order to buy our houses. We need money in order to go to doctors. That's medical aid. We need money that at a time when you no longer need us. When we are old, and that will be like a pension or a pension fund. So they couple a whole set of factors to keep themselves alive, and they determine the wage. And often this price of the wage is much lower than the workers produce. Is much, much lower than truly what the workers produce. So in the 8 hours a day, it takes a worker maybe 1 hour to already pay the raw materials, to already pay the things that went into production. And then, but the product is sold at a 12-hour price, which means 8 hours minus 12, 4 hours of that time that was put in goes as a surplus, as a profit to the person that owns that factory or owns the means of production. So profit, the origins of profit is wages. This gets complicated when it comes to machinery. So the biggest dream of capitalists is to have workers out of the factories and have the machines that produce. That will have a lot of complications. One, the first complication is, of course, the machine is going to get there. You don't pay wages. It gets there, and then, it produces for you. It's part of the factors of production. You no longer have a person negotiating medical aid and so on and so forth. But in the long run, that machine, unlike human beings, you're going to have a situation where profits begin to fall. You're going to have a situation where either they stay the same because you can't manipulate, you can't take, the machine input down. It's like stays the same. But the second problem that it can present is that it means now there are people out there who don't have machines, who don't have factories, and they don't have money to buy because they are not employed. As a result, who's buying your products? Who's going to buy your products? If all the factories in the world are full of machines, it's going to have a crisis of oversupply, a crisis of overproduction. We'll have too many products in the world, too many products in life, and there's people are there, but they don't have money to buy them. They don't have the money to buy them. Why? Because they are unemployed. But in general, capitalism always operates on a distorted logic that if I overproduce, I can make more profit. And that always meets a certain ceiling because people can only consume so much. That is why the biggest, most important ideological, cultural influences drive us us into constant consumerism. You know, we cycle of like constantly consuming keeps constantly producing, and as a result, profiting. So that whole entire system, but at some point, it gets out of steam because people can only consume so much on one hand. On the other, if you are replacing them with machines, you're going to produce goods or services and nobody is consuming them. That I hope that you're keeping up. So when I spoke about the wage, when I spoke about the extraction of surplus from wage, that was important because that's where the exploitation of the working class really is that they are not given truly the amount of the things that they produce. They are given little. And this is the point of exploitation, the point of disjuncture between those who own and those who don't own. And this is the origins of the class struggle, is that workers constantly have to grow into understanding and appreciating that they are the real producers, that they are the ones that make the economy to move. They are the ones that are the driving force of this capitalist civilization. So how do we resolve this whole cycle? They have to struggle, they have to unite, they can't fight on their own. You can't negotiate the wage on your own. You can't negotiate a pension fund on your own. You have to unite. But ultimately, the greatest, most important breakthrough is to take over production directly and produce for yourselves. And this is the beginning, as it were, of socialism. The beginning of the end of production for profit's sake. So let's go now to this concept of socialism, which is the last one. What is socialism? Socialism is not us the same. It's not us walking the same way, singing the same song, all of us wearing berets or all of us wearing gumboots. No, that is not socialism. Socialism is not us thinking the same, dressed the same. No, socialism doesn't mean that. Socialism just truly, at a basic level. I mean, of course, it's much more complicated, but at a basic level, since we've been keeping things basic, socialism is the day or the elimination of wage labor, where we end production for profit's sake and we inaugurate a system in which we produce for human beings, in which we produce for people, not for profit. We chase people. We live for each other, not for profit, not to have like R1 billion in the bank. You've got R1 billion in the bank, and so what? It's useless without other people. It's useless without the rest of the people who are in the factories making that billion be there. So the idea is, let us stop producing for profit. Let us begin to produce for human beings. Socialism is an industrial society. It has industry, it has innovation, it has science, it has constant transformation of the tools of action, but the purpose for that movement is not the maximization of profit, making Johan Rupert fat and address us with arrogance on Power FM. It is to produce so that all of us as humanity can live. It is to produce for people. Capitalism it gets this right. It gets production, innovation, industry right. But its most biggest disadvantage is that all these things are driven. They are driven for the maximization of profit for those who own. And those who own are always few. Always few historically, and there will always be few because they require masses and masses of people to work excuse me, for them. So socialism is the eradication of this purpose, of this method, with the basis of class, which is the basis of social division, of social economic division, when we produce for profit. So when we produce for people, when we are not maximizing profits, that will be the start, as it were, of socialism. So how do we do this? How do we do this? I mean, people think it's like, it's like a total going back into the past, going back totally into a primitive era. No, it's not going back into a primitive era. In fact, our age is much more interesting and is much more powerful in answering this question. It's much more interesting because with the fourth industrial revolution, majority of the time we're going to have machines, particularly with artificial intelligence, machines producing things. That's one of the grounds for the elimination of the selling of labor power, is that let us produce as much as possible for everybody to be included. And finally, human beings can focus on other things like culture, like poetry, like athletics, like sports, knowing that I don't have to wake up tomorrow and go slave so that they can be guava juice on the shelf. If the machines are doing that, human beings can disarticulate themselves from selling their wage and from work as it were, which is like the socially necessary labor, and then begin to do and invest their energy on other things. Before the Industrial Revolution, is complete, in the immediate, it would mean, yes, we do wake up in the morning, we go and work, but we work not for the maximization of profit, we work for the redistribution of either healthcare or education. What we do in the mines comes back to sustain our schools. We are able to do that through a coordinated democratic economic system. And that leads to the second point, is that under socialism, we've got to have an efficient state which is going to manage these production activities that are happening and ensures that the distribution of goods and services is equitable to everyone. The principle that they establish for a socialist society has to do basically with we take from each according to their ability, and we distribute to each according to their need. What I need is what I get under a socialist society. What I need is what I get under a socialist society, but I take pleasure in my ability to contribute to the embetterment of people. That is the basic principle, as it were, of a socialist society. So what have been the examples of a socialist society? One, the example of a socialist society, and this is a big example at the moment, it is China, is that as much as possible, majority of the things that people depend on in society are being disarticulated from the logic of profit for profit's sake. You can't make profit out of health in China. You can't make profit from healing people. We all need to be healed. We all get sick. We all get coronavirus. If healthcare had been driven for people, if healthcare had been driven for the majority of the people, it wouldn't be difficult to fight coronavirus. But because majority of the healthcare system in the world is driven for private profit, only people with money have access to it, it becomes difficult now to respond to a natural disaster, to respond to a pandemic. And this is important because if the things that we all depend on, we run them as a central government system, and we run them efficiently, we run them democratically, then a lot of us won't be poor, there won't be huge inequalities, there won't be hunger, there won't be malnutrition, there won't be people who are not educated. All of us will be healthy because the basics, all the things that we need in society, all the things that we depend on are being produced in the interest of service of everyone else. So a socialist society is democratic. A socialist society is constantly revolutionizing. A socialist society has individuals who play soccer, has individuals who athletics. There is competition under a socialist society, but the only thing is that is not happening is that we don't produce in order to maximize profit. Once we produce for people. We make sure that production happens for people. Now, finally, I'm now going to deal with about 3 or 4 questions that were posed through different social media platforms to us in relation to this Q&A, frequently asked questions on Marxism. The first one came from Fighter Brown, Motsabi from the Free State, who says, who are the motive forces for the EFF revolution? The Deputy President before me spoke about motive forces when he was analyzing the founding manifesto of the EFF. And a whole host of other things, particularly a bigger discussion about the state and the revolution, the state driving a socialist project, will be explained by the next reading, which is going to be led by Kumani through reading in State and Revolution. That's why I'm dealing that much into those things, is because they're going to be repetitive. But this is an important thing. Who are the driving forces? Who are the motive forces for our socialist revolution? And the answer is straightforward. It is the working class, in particular the black working class. We have to be on the side of the oppressed, of the exploited, of the people who are robbed, of the people who are being exploited, of the people who, from whom production, what they produce is being stolen. They are not rewarded fully for what they produce. We have to stand on the side of these people. And in South Africa, it's the working class, majority of which are black people. Majority of which are black people. So that is the straightforward answer to who are the forces. The other question was from from Kassadin, who asked, what type of a state is South Africa? In a pure Marxist sense, how would we, characterize the South African state? The answer again is very simple. The South African state is a capitalist neo-colonial state. It is a capitalist neo-colonial state, meaning the state in South Africa is in service of the capitalist system. It makes sure through the laws, regulations, it makes sure that the owners of the means of production are able to make profit without being interrupted. That's the first nature of the South African state. But the second nature is that it is presiding over, it is making conditions for profit, but this profit in South Africa is mainly the profit for white people. That's why we say it's a capitalist neo-colonial state, is that it still presides over a capitalist system in which majority of the capitalists, majority of the people who are owning the factories, who are owning the businesses, the big businesses, are white people. The banks, the big industries remain white people. Very great question, and thank you very much for the question, Zipo. And then the other question came from Lindani Mayani from PE, who says, socialism, how do we get rid of the perception that socialism breeds generalized dictatorship and poverty? We do that by pointing people to China. China is a relatively much more better economic system. That's why they were much more efficient in responding to coronavirus than what you see, for an example, in what are called neoliberal capitalist societies, the United States, Italy, Spain, Britain. China were able, because it is running a system in which my individual driven egoistic interest to make profit does not override the well-being of the rest of society. So they don't place healthcare in the hands of people who are driving to make profit. They make sure that healthcare is always driven in a way that everybody can access it. So we point them to China. But also China is not a dictatorship at all. There is actually a complicated system in China of democracy based, number one, on people's proven meritocratic record. So it's a brilliant system. People's ability, you can't go and become a president in China if you've never ran or if you've never presided over a province. You can't go run a province if you've never presided over a region. So and in order for you to stand for certain democratic elections, you have to have qualifications. You have to qualify. You have to have shown and demonstrated that you did not steal, that you did not rob people, that you did not participate in nepotism or general corruption, but that also that you were efficient, that you were also efficient, and that you led selflessly. You always put the interest of the people above those of your own. So I think that in order for us to dispel this myth, we have to do aggressive political education. We have to work against the propaganda of Western imperialism and Western neoliberal media, which here in South Africa we call Stratcom. The other question by Solim Kiza from Ekurhuleni says, what would be a Marxist take on the fourth industrial revolution? As I said, the fourth industrial revolution, if indeed machines are going to replace people at the production side, it's a welcome opportunity, but the left has to work hard that when that occurs, an alternative society becomes socialism, because socialism is not automatic. Socialism is not inevitable. Socialism doesn't mean because the system of capitalism falls apart, then socialism will happen. No. Socialism is a conscious system. It is a system that must be consciously chosen, that must be consciously built. We're not going to get socialism because there was coronavirus, it collapsed the markets, it collapsed the system, without having an alternative, revolutionary, political, and organized, grassroots-based formation, which is then going to present an alternative. There can be a big world war tomorrow. There was the Spanish flu, which killed over 50 million people in 1918. After that Spanish flu, which caused real havoc in the world, socialism did not emerge. Capitalism just renegotiated itself, reinvented itself. There were 2 world wars. After those 2 world wars, even infrastructure at the center of capitalist societies, Europe, infrastructure was destroyed. Socialism did not come. Much more recently, there was the global financial crisis in which financial markets, which are the backbone of the capitalist system at the moment, collapsed. Socialism did not come. Why? Because socialism is not automatic. In fact, what might happen in the cases is that capitalism reinvents itself. It renegotiates itself. It comes out as a better and more complicated species. Or we might become more barbaric. Things might just fall apart. There's no law, there's no order. So a political movement has to be built that goes out to campaign and to make society, particularly the working class, aware that they can run their own lives, that they themselves can run production, that they themselves can run and manage this civilization without the bosses, without people who want to maximize profit, without the logic of profit maximization, meaning commodity production. So as it were, that would, I think, present a big opportunity. So the fourth industrial revolution does indeed completely takes over the whole world, artificial intelligence in particular, machines that think for themselves and they produce other machines, they do things for themselves. If that does happen, if it really does happen, it's a big opportunity for a social society to emerge, for the elimination of wage labor to emerge, but it won't happen without an international political movement united, and that unites the working class, that is grassrooted, bringing about that alternative. If we don't do that, the bosses will still tell us after the completion of the fourth industrial revolution as to how we live and how they become rich, how we constantly live for them. So it means if they're no longer doing that, you'll see sports will start being the biggest thing. We'll all want to develop ability. If you don't play sports, you are unable to get a wage. If you can't paint, if you can't sculpture, those will be the last elements, the last things out of aesthetics, out of culture that will be making people get money, because machines are going to be in charge of everything else. So people might develop, you can't go into F&B and watch. You want to watch human beings being skillful. So sports and other forms of culture may be the last thing that people will be doing in order to get the wage. But even there, there's still an opportunity for us not to go there. How do we do that? By engaging in a struggle that unites the working class, a class struggle that unites the working class for the dismantling of production, for the maximization of profit. so that production can be for people. The last question is from Samuel Ramahulo from Johannesburg. And Samuel is asking, what is a Marxist view of religion? Well, I wish I could speak about commodity fetishism, because the inner principle of why Karl Marx's critique of religion and the ways in which it plays a role in making people not see how they are being exploited. It's like the market. We go to the market, we look at oranges. You don't ask, when you look at an orange, when you get to the market, you say, how much is the orange? You don't ask who produced it, where is that farm, what are the working conditions, and what does that person, how much did that person get paid? You simply just buy the iPhone and go. You don't ask about the conditions of work, the conditions under which it was produced. It's like people who buy rhino horns or who buy elephant horns in ivory. They just go and buy a jewel, which is an ivory. They don't ask, was the elephant killed? If it was killed, how was it killed? Who killed it? Where did that person come from? And you don't ask those questions. You jump into the market, and in the market, it's as if it's a relationship between products. It's a relationship between the product, which is your money, and the product, which is an iPhone, or which is an ivory necklace or an ivory bracelet. The reality is that masks the real human condition, the real materiality that brings these things into being. And that is, people wake up in the morning and they get exploited for you to sit in front of a computer that you have no idea how it was produced, and speak and watch an EFF book club presentation. So it is through Marxism that we are able to do massive political education, through building a movement that is grassroots related, through door-to-doors, through rallies, through the contestation of elections, through engaging workers in the trade unions to fight for better wages. But in that struggle, we have to lift everybody's consciousness. We have to make everybody aware that actually we don't have to serve for profit maximization. We can do these things in a much more efficient way that keeps everybody in the system, that keeps everybody alive and sustained, as opposed to poverty, inequality, and other forms of human suffering. That's it. So thank you very much for tuning in. And I just want to encourage all of you once more that let us read the questions that are being answered. The questions that we are going to deal with are questions that had to do with the reading. The reading that we dealt with had 38 questions. Many of them, we will keep repeating throughout. But if you've read, the crux of what I said constitutes what I said constitutes the crux of the 38 questions that you read. Next, we are reading Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, State and Revolution. We will post the reading, the link to the reading. But also, if you want us to send you a PDF, there is a WhatsApp number. We can WhatsApp you the PDF. Read. There's no shortcut. If I'm talking here, some of the things they will come better if you read. So for the next lockdown, 3 days, read, read, read. You wake up, you do a little bit of exercise, you read. And make sure that we improve our understanding of society, we improve our understanding of revolutionary ideas. In the end, when we have understood what we are doing, we will conduct the struggle in a much more better way, and the struggle won't depend on who is there. It will depend on the fact that collectively we take the responsibility for our own individual improvement of the understanding of the struggle. Read, read, read. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I wish you well in the next reading over the next 3 days. Amanda.